everyone for tuning in the Facebook world to listen to our programs all day. I'm very excited about this program, as I have been with the other programs. Thank you for continuing to stay tuned. And you know, I'm you know how the world sometimes works, where it puts people in your life. And I met Mr. Bilici last year at the World Affairs Council National Conference in Washington, D.C. And he said, hey, do you by any chance know the Raindrop Foundation? And next thing you know, I'm visiting with Ferhat and the Raindrop Foundation. If you don't know about the Raindrop Foundation, please click on the link. Samantha is posting that on the Facebook. So please learn what they do. They do a lot of great community work here in San Antonio, but also nationally. They have other affiliates that do it too. And I've come to know Ferhat closely, and I really appreciate and respect him. And I'm very glad that he's going to moderate this. And I'm very pleased and grateful to have a local representative, a representative from a local university, Our Lady of the Lake University. Dr. Barnett is joining us as well. And we also have, of course, Mr. Bilici, and I won't steal Ferhat's thunder about his bio, but he's a very impressive background. And I so much appreciate you for giving your time to us and to share your experiences and your wisdom about the press in Turkey and also the U.S. And without further ado, I want to introduce my good friend, my good Turkish friend, Ferhat. So Ferhat, please, it's all yours.
Oh, thank you so much, Armen. I mean, this is such a pleasure that, you know, to moderate this program, and such a pleasure to be your friend. I mean, I remember the date we met, and like we were like kind of, okay, so like people from different backgrounds are getting together. And then, you know, our first breakfast was very interesting. I mean, very mind-opening that a Turkish, Armenian, Azerbaijani, and the Kurdish get together, and then we just enjoyed the tea, the breakfast, and the tea all together. It was such a nice time, and since then our friendship has grown bigger. And I'd like to briefly introduce myself. My name is Dr. Ferhat Ozturk. I have a PhD in cell and molecular biology, and I used to teach at a university in Turkey and also Alma College, Michigan. I taught biochemistry, molecular biology, genetics, and such things. And then I moved to San Antonio in 2008, and I'm teaching at School of Science and Technology. And I'm teaching biomedical sciences to the middle and high school students right now. And at the same time, I'm the event coordinator for the Raindrop Foundation San Antonio. I've been volunteering for it since I moved here. And today, we will have Dr. Leda Barnett from Our Lady of Lake University, I mean, in short, OLLU. And then we will have Mr. Abdülhamit Bilici. He's the chief editor, former chief editor of the most circulated daily newspaper in Turkey, which was called Zaman. In English, it's called The Times. So it was circulating more than 1 million a day, and then until the government had seized and shut down the whole newspaper, and Mr. Bilici was able to flee the country. However, most of his friends are or his colleagues are in jail for back to 4 years or even more. And Mr. Bilici was also one of our speakers at Annual Dialogue and Friendship Dinner back in 2019, and it was coincidentally the same day or commemoration or anniversary of the closure of the Zaman newspaper in Turkey. And Dr. Leda Barnett, she's an expert in the political science, especially in the American political science and also South American. And she will share her expertise and perspective about the freedom of press in the United States and also around the world. So I'd like to start with Mr. Bilici. And would you please introduce yourself, or would you please talk about what you have went through in Turkey in terms of the suppression of the freedom of press And if you can summarize us, and we'll be happy to follow up with that.
Thank you. Thanks for Armen and the World Affairs Council of San Antonio. And thanks for the Raindrop Foundation. This has been a good friendship that producing some nice results, some
Yes.
concrete results, which is very, very nice, very promising. I hope we can have different occasions to come together. And luckily, the corona is over and I can come physically again to San Antonio, which I had very nice memories last time when I was there. So I'm a journalist for over 25 years. Now I live in exile in America, namely in Virginia, for last 4 years. My career and my life indeed toppled down by an authoritarian intervention into democracy. So it is not easy for American audience to understand my situation because it is not easy to digest. So just to give you an example to understand my situation, just some seconds, think that the editor at the Washington Post or New York Times is shut down by the government, by the administration, and then its editor, the editor-in-chief, had to leave to another country, to Canada or Germany or whatever country that can get away. So this is my situation. So my newspaper was the largest circulated newspaper of the country, and our circulations once was over 1 million. And we were supporting Turkey to be a real democracy. And we were fighting against corruption. And we were, as an editorial policy, very much giving platforms to different voices in society. So in a regular day, you could see in our newspaper a conservative person, a liberal, a social democrat, maybe a religious person, having their perspectives on the same issue. So we were very much proud of that colorful representation of different voices. Because of that, it has been appreciated. Our newspaper has been appreciated by the people, and we were ready to celebrate our 30th year, 30, since 1986, 87. But Turkey went through a very strange process under the same party, under the same government, mainly the leadership of Erdogan. So since the party was founded at the end of 2002, and they had a very reform-oriented, democracy-oriented priorities and policies. And until 2010, 2011, it was, I mean, Turkey under this administration became a rising star of democracy. And the world was referring Turkey as a model of Muslim democracy, which is very rare. So, and the whole world, the Europeans, Americans, Canadians, all democrats in the world very much supporting that government of Erdogan. And we were also supporting. And one of our priorities was to support Turkey joining European Union to be a real democracy. Because when you think Turkey, its democracy was interrupted 5 times by different military interventions in the past. So we were aspiring to be a real democracy. And being member of European Union was a way to that goal, to that result. And the party, Erdogan's party, was also very much supportive of it. But I mean, things started to change after 2013. And instead of becoming a model of democracy, unfortunately, Erdogan turned its back to Europe, to democratic values, and turned his face towards the Middle Eastern autocracies and wanted to create a one-man rule even alienating a lot of members of his own party, the founders of his party. And once he became one man in his party, and then the second goal was to be one man in the country. And when we learned, when we understood that Erdogan is not the same guy that we were supporting, we changed our policies. We started to criticize since 2012, 2013. We were writing against the corruption and this authoritarian tendency. And that was the beginning of our end. So an authoritarian government doesn't like two things. One is free press. The other is independent judiciary. Because when you are corrupt, when you like to create a one-man rule, an autocracy, a kind of dictatorship, these two things are an obstacle in front of you. So you need to crash free press and independent judiciary. Now both of them lost. In last 4 years, 200 media outlets, including my newspaper, my news agency, a lot of other media outlets has been shut down. Turkey became the largest or the worst jailer of journalists in the world. And now Turkey is ranking 154 out of 180 countries in the World Press Freedom Index, which is terrible because Turkey is a NATO member. Turkey is part of all Western and international institutions. So this is very bizarre situation. And a lot of my friends, some of them are professors of politics, history, who were our columnists in jail for last 4 years. And they have 5 more years to serve. And some of them got life sentence, including my chief designer, who is in jail in solitary confinement, Fevzi Yazıcı. I recommend you to read one of pieces, an article about him in Washington Post recently. We had an exhibition out of his drawings that he produced in the cell, in the solitary confinement. So this is a terrible situation, but it is not limited. I mean, the destruction of democracy starts maybe by destruction of free media, but it doesn't end there. It just starts there. So it goes to teachers, it goes to academics, it goes to civil servants, it goes to judges, lawyers. So now Turkey turned into a kind of prison for journalists and for anyone who is critical of the Erdogan's government and policies. And now we have a political leader of a political party in jail, more than 1,500 lawyers, more than 2,000 judges and prosecutors, and thousands of women, a lot of babies in jail. So Turkey has maybe the highest educated inmate population in the world now. And this is so sad. This is so sad for me to observe Turkey's transformation from a model of democracy under the same leadership, under the same government, under the same party, into a country that I can't recognize. And this happened in 5-6 years. So now my point is, Turkey was supposed to be a good example of how a Muslim country can be democratic, modern, reform-oriented, and it could be a good inspiration, a source of inspiration for others, especially in our region, in our part of the world. But now it became another example to see for especially democratic world that how democracy could be hijacked and destroyed under a populist leader in a very short time. So I encourage people, my colleagues and academics, to study more how that happened. So I experienced that. I have a lot of things to say, of course, but our time, I guess, is limited. So I like to stop there and then leave it to the Q&A session that I can share my thoughts about that.
Thanks so much, Mr. Bilici. I mean, these are very eye-opening experiences that you went through, and it's very clear that, I mean, the democracy is very fragile and then can be torn down by the suppression of the press freedom. And I believe this is one of the most, most vulnerable thing in the whole world. And I would like to just mention that according to Freedom House's Freedom in the World data, media freedom has been deteriorating around the world over the past decade, with new forms of repression taking hold in open societies and authoritarian states alike. And this is not only in Turkey, but also some other countries, even in the European countries. I mean, nowadays we are hearing from Belarus and from others like Hungary and Austria. So the freedom of press has been suppressed. And but on the other hand, I mean, when we turn our face to the United States, press freedom is one of the most fundamental pillars of the American democracy. And it has constitutional protections in the United States, and that these protections are stronger than in any other country around the world. But I would like to ask now Dr. Barnett about what do you think about the status of freedom of media or freedom of press in the United States based on your experience and observations?
Well, first of all, thank you everyone for joining us today. Thank you so much, World Affairs Council and Raindrop Foundation, for asking me to be here today. I'm very honored to have this conversation. I guess I would like to make just some sort of general remarks about globally what the status of free press is, and then kind of talk a little bit about the United States. So kind of more of a little comparative perspective. And in particular, some of the threats that we're seeing to press freedoms and democracies, because these threats are often more nuanced and insidious. I guess I would first emphasize an important concept of the sentiment of legitimacy and legitimacy of institutions, whether we're talking about the free press or the electoral process or decisions rendered by courts. This is really a critical element in the stability and success of any regime. You know, we can't really have effective governance without that. And democracy really only exists if people believe in it. You know, having it written down in documents is not really adequate. So we think, you know, why do we believe in the news media? Why do we trust our constitutional values? Why do we generally follow laws? You know, why do we see them as authoritative? And so without legitimacy, those things are just, you know, they're just pieces of paper. I'm thinking about political scientist Robert Dahl compared legitimacy to like a reservoir. And so as long as the water maintains a certain level, political stability is maintained. But then if it falls, you know, the legitimacy falls below a certain level, it just endangers the whole political system. And I mean, we know that in developing democracies, they're trying to achieve legitimacy, but in established democracies, it's something that we really have to be vigilant about, because it's, as Mr. Bilici alluded to, in Turkey, we can see how quickly that can erode. And the trend that we've been seeing, this trend of kind of the erosion of press freedom, is really linked to a global decline in democracy itself. The erosion of press freedom, I think, is both a symptom of and a contributor to the breakdown of other democratic institutions. And you mentioned Freedom House. You know, it's a super respected independent organization providing research and analysis on democracy around the world. And they have said in their Freedom in the World report that 19%, 16 countries have endured a reduction in their press freedom scores. And they're just talking about like the mature democracies. We're seeing it everywhere. We see in India under the Modi regime, Israel under the Netanyahu regime, Spain with the Vox party, Austria, the Kurz government, Hungary with Orban. By the way, Hungary, the first EU country to slide into partly free, according to Freedom House. And then even the United States sliding over the last 10 years, and also under the Trump administration. So when you see a slide in mature democracies, it makes it easier for authoritarian countries to kind of continue that persecution. We know what to expect in authoritarian regimes. We expect, not that we want it, but we expect for there to be this curtailing of civil liberties. But in democracies, it's a lot more subtle and gradual. And so this erosion of media freedom around the world in democracies, people really need to be vigilant I always think of the quote that Aristotle said, transgressions creep in slowly and at last ruin the state. So they're really slow and stealthy. So, I mean, we can look at a lot of general trends, concentration of ownership of the media and a few parent companies. We need that diverse and antagonistic sources for the welfare of the public. We see regulatory and financial pressure, public denunciations of honest journalists, even by elected officials offering preferential treatment of ideologically supportive outlets. That's through like lucrative state contracts, favorable regulatory decisions, even preferential access to state information. In a lot of mature democracies, we've also seen like a rise of right-wing populism and hyper-nationalism. This really, they usually paint themselves as like defenders of the true identity of the nation and that they're standing up against perceived threats. The threats are almost always ethnic groups, immigrants, religious minorities, such as Muslims in India is a mature democracy that I would point out. And they paint the threat as severe enough to override democratic principles. And so that's a danger. So looking at what's going on in the US, I would say there's both positive and negative. For the positive aspects, Freedom House still ranks on the question, are there free and independent media? Freedom House still ranks the United States as a 4 out of 4. And we have deeply rooted protection for press freedom in the First Amendment of the Constitution, which is very explicit in its language of protecting press freedom and against laws curtailing it. And then also just like, you know, a couple of centuries of case law that has mostly upheld that. And then when I was talking about legitimacy earlier, that's also kind of a reservoir that we have relied on. However, we are seeing an erosion in that legitimacy, and I'll talk more about that in just a minute. But really, I mean, like, people still believe in the First Amendment rights. It's very deeply enshrined. Freedom House talks about there's a high degree of pluralism with diverse news sources. We have, you know, cable TV, print journalism, independent media. Freedom House ranks our internet freedom score 77 out of 100, mostly downgraded, I think, for access. But then there are the areas of alarm, and, you know, given Mr. Bilici's comments on what we have seen in Turkey, this is, you know, it's like red flag territory here. If we look at like Reporters Without Borders, their 2020 World Press Freedom Index ranks the United States as 45th in the world. They have a pretty elaborate index that they use for that. According to
United States is the 45th or 4th to 5th?
45th.
Wow, it's pretty bad.
Yeah, I know, it's shocking. 45th. They point out a lot of instances that have shown sort of a non-democratic trend in recent years. For example, in March 2019, there was a leaked document that revealed the US government was using a secret database tracking journalists and also activists, anybody that border authorities believed should be stopped for questioning along the US-Mexico border. We've also seen the Trump administration has replaced a lot of like the traditional forms of press access that we've had under every president with those that limit the ability of the journalists to ask questions. So it's kind of a cutting off of the press. There's a bit like a reduction in daily televised White House press briefings, like with a designated press secretary, and instead remarks that delivering remarks without question, you know, without allowing journalists to ask questions.
Mr. Bilici, do you think these sounds familiar to you back in Turkey?
Sadly familiar.
I mean, I remember that President Erdogan was not allowing some of the, I mean, you flew with Erdogan a couple of times in the same plane, right? As like when his visits.
Yeah, as an editor, I was very close, one of closer journalists to him. not particularly, but as all journalists, some editors were accompanying him for some domestic or international visits, and I was also sometimes invited to accompany him. So I interviewed him several times.
Yeah. So, I mean, but eventually you and the people, the other journalists like-minded, you, like criticizing them, I think he just started to stop inviting you to accompany him for trips. And then how did this evolve? I mean, how did these things, like, what are the steps that Erdogan has prevented the free journalist, to get news from him? I mean, or his, his media, or like his.
I can describe how it gradually evolved, but I don't know if Professor finished the negative signs that she was underlining. Did Professor Barnett finish?
I have a few more, but go ahead. I want to hear that. Go ahead.
Okay, okay. With your permission. So, of course, it did not happen overnight. And when I'm here in this country since April 2016. So it is the same year that Trump started his presidency. So a lot of things that I started to see in this country were very much deja vu for me, sadly. Of course, I mean, Turkish democracy in terms of its flaws and having been interrupted 5 times by military interventions and never a full-fledged democracy cannot be compared to American democracy. The American democracy is much more stable, much powerful and stronger. Institutions are very much more established compared to Turkey. At least we don't know, for instance, any military intervention taking place in American democratic history. There are of course ups and downs in this country, in America as well, like the civil rights movements, and still this racial debates and a lot of conflicts continue, but you can't compare 2 democracies. So having said that, but a lot of things were very much identical and similar to what we were having. So in our case, in Turkish case, so when we started to see that Erdogan, who pushing Turkey, directing Turkey into a democratic oriented world, to European Union orientation, and instead of that, he switched to an authoritarian perspective, direction. And when we realized the amount, the extent of the corruption his family and his ministers involved, as responsible journalists, we started to be critical, although we were supporting them before, as I underlined. So when we switched our editorial line from supportive to critical, because of the change in the parties or the Erdogan's policies, our position did not change. We were supporting still Turkey to be a full-fledged democracy, to be a free country, respecting human rights, and to be part of European Union. But Erdogan changed, and because of that change, we changed our line. And since then, it started incrementally. So, for instance, I remember, and a lot of our readers, whoever may be listening to us now will remember, that our reporter was asking a question about a corruption allegation in a press conference. And Erdogan, at that time, our reporter was able to be at that press conference and to be able to ask that questions, very, very journalistic questions, no insult. But Erdogan, instead of responding the allegations, he started a fight with the reporter. Not just with the reporter, but the media institutions that he is working, the owners of that media, etc. So that continued for a while. This is, I'm talking about now 2013, now 7 years ago. So, for instance, one of our reporters asked to the then leaders, one of the leaders of the government, Ahmet Davutoğlu. It was also a critical question. but the answer was so strange. The Davutoğlu said that if you are able to ask that question and able to go home safely, it means Turkey is a democracy. So can you imagine, I mean, what kind of perspective of democracy is this? But we were happy with that. We were happy that we were able to go to these press conferences and then ask our questions in the name of journalism. But after a while, after a couple of weeks, the doors were closed to our reporters. They said, you are no more allowed to cover those press conferences. And the second step was to cancel our, revoke our press cards for our reporters. And then Erdogan called people, his constituency, to boycott our newspaper. Not to buy the newspaper. And then he was calling the companies not to purchase advertisement from us. So he was sending tax inspectors to put pressure on our media. So we were having court cases against our reporters, against our institution. All of them were aiming, of course, to silence us or change our editorial line, not to be critical, or not to write about corruption, not to criticize the authoritarian perspective or the policies. But these, of course, gradually applied. But at the end, we did not change. Of course, we had troubled times in terms of financial situation. Our circulation decreased, our advertisement revenue decreased, and we were very much busy with the lawyers and the court cases. Once, as editor, I was more busier with lawyers than reporters, trying to defend in the courts. And lots of our reporters were regular visitors of the courts at that time. So all these measures did not help Erdogan to change our editorial policy. So we continued to be critical, to write the truth or whatever we believed as journalistically right. So finally, with a court decision, they appointed trustees to the board of our company. We are talking about now March 2016. So it started 2013. We are 3 years of struggle, 3 years of very strong conflict between the government and our media. And then with this, the trustees came not peacefully. They came with a brutal police force. They occupied our headquarters in Istanbul, and they kicked me out as the editor and kicked anyone who were objecting to their perspective or their policies. And then they made the newspaper, imagine New York Times being occupied by the police, and then the editor is fired, and then new editor is hired, and then in 24 hours it became a mouthpiece instead of a critical newspaper. So for 3-4 months they continued like that. Our readers protested. From 700,000, the circulation decreased to 5,000 in just 1 week. So it became a rubbish indeed. They turned the newspaper, a very important newspaper, into a kind of bad joke. And when there was an infamous coup attempt in July 2016, that gave Erdogan biggest, opportunity to silence opposition and the free media further. So my newspaper was until that time, it was under their administration. It was a mouthpiece, but administered by the government-appointed people. But since then, since July 16, they shut it down altogether, together with 200 other medias that were critical. The TV stations, websites, news agencies, radio stations, a lot of them. So today, in last 4 years, since 2016, this coup failed, the coup attempt. There are lots of debates whether this was a real coup or a staged coup, a fake coup. The questions focus on this staged and fake perspective because many people see that Erdogan benefited from the coup. Turkish democracy destroyed. I mean, if a coup failed, why lots of journalists are in jail? Why lots of politicians are in jail? Why lots of judges are in jail? I mean, if a coup failed, we should celebrate it as a democracy, and we could be a better democracy. But this did not happen. Instead, Erdogan made his dream of a one-man rule, and now 95% of Turkish media is under one man's control. And with this control over media, he is able to brainwash people into a lot of crazy ideas. That as if Turkey is getting much stronger, much powerful, and is getting an important country, an important power in the world. This is the image that this media portrays, which is the reality is just the opposite. Turkey is in the rankings of any meaningful thing in terms of economy, in terms of level of education, in terms of press freedom, in terms of rule of law. In every aspect, it is down. But with this brainwashing, many people, millions of people now think that Turkey is getting a superior country in the world.
Because they are like fed from one source. Okay, I'd like to get back to Dr. Barnett. So I'm sorry to interrupt your explanation about the negativities. Yeah, can you please continue about your perspective?
Well, I thought it was chilling, you know, how Mr. Bilici pointed out about the journalist that was singled out, and just for not personalizing a question, but asking it in a journalistic way, in a neutral way, because we have had some instances of that in the United States. That Jim Acosta is the one that comes to my mind. From CNN, and then later on, I think it was supposed to be based on him, but there was a violent viral video that went around that the president even retweeted himself that depicted the journalist with the news logo superimposed over his face and him being punched. And so that, I mean, you know, that's just a not only obviously violent, but just disrespecting and calling into question, you know, the integrity of the media from the administration. And then we know that we've seen language like enemy of the people, calling outlets fake news if they any critical coverage at all. You know, I always think of the George Orwell quote that said, freedom of the press, if it means anything at all, means the freedom to criticize and oppose. That's the role of it, you know. It's not to be.
Yes, that's what is press for mostly.
Yeah, that's what, you know. So I see disturbing trends like that, even threats to tighten libel laws and to review certain outlets' broadcast licenses despite the lack of legal authority to do so. I wanted to also bring up quickly two other things. One would be the violence that we've seen towards journalists in the Black Lives Matter protests. Even when the journalists are off to the side and they're not, you know, impeding the duties of law enforcement, and not just by law enforcement, but by their fellow Americans, you know, which is disturbing to me because they're there chronicling, you know, one of our First Amendment freedoms, and they're being attacked. So that's a disturbing trend. And then I also wanted to mention,
I mean, the plastic bullets and some other thing. Yeah.
Yes.
I've seen in Minnesota, I think.
The video footage is really disturbing. Yeah. The Committee to Protect Journalists in their U.S. Press Freedom Tracker just for this year has some pretty scary statistics. They say that they have documented 185 physical attacks on journalists, 84 equipment damages, 102 journalists arrested. 10 instances of equipment searched or seized, 92 tear gassings, 54 pepper sprayings, and 169 rubber bullets or projectiles, like you mentioned.
Big number. And I have seen
Yeah,
this.
it's a lot more than we've seen.
The CNN journalist was like handcuffed, right? And he was like, when the camera was on, and then the whole team. I mean, this is very disturbing. And unfortunately, this is kind of the path that some autocratic countries are following. I mean, I was going to come, I think our time is a little bit limited, but I just got to come about like the freedom of, like what could happen if the freedom of press is completely gone. It's an extremist example, but Jamal Khashoggi, I mean, when he was a free journalist, and he used to work for Washington Post. Am I right? I'm sorry, please correct me if I'm wrong. Yes. And then when he visited Turkey, I mean, to the Saudi Arabia embassy there to get some of his paperwork, he was just like killed and dismembered, and then just like brutally or like violently, I don't know how to name it, but he was a journalist. And unfortunately, the reaction from the world, especially the modern, I mean, democratic world, was not loud enough, I believe. I mean, yes, it was on the news for a while, but what happened? I mean, they just did it, and they just like go with it. So is it how, I mean, what, from here out to come, I mean, in the United States, now we are we live in this country, and then we would like to protect this, our First Amendment freedoms. But in terms of freedom of press, as citizens, what can we do? I mean, in our part, what can we do to protect this? I mean, Dr. Barnett, what do you think? How can we protect? And this gradual increase in Turkey is a very clear example how these things don't happen overnight, and it goes gradually, day by day or month by month. But as citizens, what can we do? I mean, to protect the freedom of press in the United States?
Well, I have a couple of ideas on that, but regarding Jamal Khashoggi, there was no condemnation at all by the United States, and that's the other thing about all of the erosion of democracy, is that if the world is seeing mature democracies and established democracies, if they're on the slide, that provides a kind of an out for authoritarians and dictators to be even worse, because the world sort of expects democracies to defend human rights and freedoms, and so that's exploited by unfree societies. But as terms of what we could do, what comes to my mind first, I think, would be thinking about social media, that people should be a little skeptical about what they see on social media. You know, consume as wide a variety as possible of news sources. Don't just rely on Twitter or Fox News or something like that to get your news sources. Read a wide variety. And if you see something that looks outrageous, take the time to look it up to verify for yourself, instead of just spreading the propaganda, because that's just, you're just helping them. You're helping those that want to curtail free media, whether it be from within the United States or even people that are trying to meddle, bots and so forth that are trying to spread disinformation. So that is the thing that comes to my mind. And then I think people should support organizations like Reporters Without Borders and the Committee to Protect Journalists and the ACLU, because they're litigating. We saw, as you talked about in Turkey, how it often starts in the courts. So we could support those who are fighting to keep those freedoms.
Okay. And Mr. Bilici, before we finalize today's talk, I just want to ask you a question. Is there any point, I mean, in terms of your administration and being the editor-in-chief in the Zaman newspaper, is there anything like that you say, I wish I would do this way? I mean, I wish I have done this before things got worse. I mean, I know it was not in your hands. I know Erdogan was turning into a more Middle Eastern autocracy. I mean, Turkey was going into that direction. But was there anything that you are saying, okay, I wish I would do that?
Yeah, before that, a lot of things that I, of course, reconsider, revisit, what I could do better or different. But before that, I like to add some points to what Professor Barnett was saying, how to defend press freedom. So most important thing that after all that experience that I went through, that my country is going through, is that the understanding that press freedom or democracy is not just for journalists or just for politicians or just for elite. It is for whole people. It is for teachers. It is for a person working at McDonald's. It is for academic. It is for business people. It's for everyone. So without that understanding, if we assume, if we think, if we suppose that the press freedom is an issue between the powerful people in business or in politics and the journalists, we are very badly mistaken. Because journalists, first of all, cannot protect press freedom. Journalists cannot protect democracy. They are weak. They are less. They are few. So if there is not an awareness, the consciousness in society, a bipartisan consciousness about importance of rule of law, importance of press freedom, importance of democracy, it will be very easy to destroy it. And if we have it, it will be impossible to destroy it. It will be very difficult to destroy it. In Turkey, we were not able to do that. So we were polarized, as America is polarized now. So we were giving priority to our narrow interests, narrow agendas. So we were thinking that, in terms of America, for instance, there are people who are supporting, who are against abortion, let's say. So having a breakthrough in that seems for those people is the most important thing in life. But I think, and I say with my experience, that if rule of law, if press freedom is destroyed, even if you got everything you like in terms of abortion, you will not be safe. Your life will be destroyed, could be destroyed. Because democracy, press freedom, rule of law are the foundations of a country or the roof of a country. So other things are the colors in our rooms, Some may ask for abortion rights, some may ask for other rights that are very respected. All these positions and ideas are respected, but it should not be in a trade-off between those higher values of democracy that are part of our constitutions. These are not part of the American constitutions. Unfortunately, these were the parts of Turkish constitution as well. But we made a big mistake by thinking that if we support a political party which is delivering in terms of our narrow agendas, we will be better off. Yes, we got some of those narrow agendas fulfilled, but the foundation destroyed. So this is very important to be understood. If I have just one message, this is it. So as I said, journalists are not powerful enough to protect democracy or press freedom, and the journalist and the press is attacked not for the sake of journalists. Democracy, when democracy is targeted, the attack starts with attacking media, because this is the first line in the defense of democracy. And the control of information is so vital. If you like to create a one-man rule or an autocracy or an authoritarian regime, first thing to get rid of is the free information, the critical information. So that is very important. And the other thing is, I mean, if you see any sign that someone is attacking press freedom or rule of law, you should be alarmed. That attack may be coming from a Republican or Democrat. I don't care about this. I speak in a bipartisan, non-partisan fashion. That and the polarization is not in the interest of society, and it is not good for any democracy. This is very good for bad people, for bad leaders, and so we should be smart consumers. You know, and this is my last remark. You know, when we want to buy a home, when we want to buy a car, we make a smart and logical investigation, you know, to consume. You know, you don't buy a car just your friend tells you that this car is good. You go to reports, you see the studies, reports, etc., and then make your decision. So in consuming the news, we should do the same thing. We should be smart, open-minded, investigative, not to trust whatever we are told from just one source. I mean, if I am telling this audience, a perspective about Turkey, you should check it with other perspectives. This is just one perspective of an exiled journalist. There are lots of perspectives. That's very important for me.
Thank you. Thank you so much. I mean, Mr. Bilici and Dr. Barnett, I mean, you really reminded us the values instead of the interests. So we have to stick with the values of democracy. We have to stick with the principles of democracy, and especially freedom of press, but not our personal or political interests. So values and principles are the key, are the pillars of this. And I'd like to finalize this talk today. It is 2:51 p.m. and I think we have another talk coming up at World Affairs Council. Armen, do we have another minute for Dr. Barnett for her final remarks?
I think we have the other panelists gearing up. I'm sorry about that.
Okay.
If that's okay, but it's a lively discussion. I appreciate you all for taking time.
Thank you so much. Yeah.
Thank you for the comparative analysis there and your thoughts about what the press is going through now here in the U.S. And also, Mr. Bilici, thank you for sharing your personal, for lack of a better word, your adventures through with a regime that is not very friendly with the press. And so, and Ferhat, thank you so much for your very thoughtful, poignant questions. I'm very thankful that you did that. You know, when you do something good, you're going to be asked to do it again. So
I'm honored. I'm honored to be, you know, like to be a part of this program. I'm so happy with this.
If for those watching, thank you for tuning in. Please check out the Raindrop Foundation. They do a lot of good work in the community. Please reach out to us if you want to connect with any of our panelists today. Check out Our Lady of the Lake, a great school also. So be sure. And I'm pointing at you because you're right here. Otherwise, you realize that doesn't mean it. So
thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Armen. Thank you,
so
Ferhat.
much.
Thank you.
It was my
Thank you,
pleasure.
Professor.